you know, I should probably start with more background about New England Forestry Foundation. That might give you a sense of our, kind of overall management practice. We're a 75-year-old or 76-year-old organization now, formed in 1944 by a group of folks in the Boston area who were concerned about forestry practices around that time, in the mid 40s there and before that. Just that it was very exploitative and of the forest, and was not looking out for one, the long-term health and productivity of the forest, or the landowner, the people that owned those lands. So they formed this organization to kind of spread the message of a better way of practicing forestry in New England, that accounted for those things, but also the wider benefits that we get from forests, whether it's the scenic values, the wildlife habitat, and it's evolved over the time, and realized the impact on water quality, air quality, carbon sequestration now, that I'm sure was not an issue for them in 1944. So NEFF started acquiring land, mostly by donations in 1945, shortly after it was founded, so we could essentially practice what we were preaching. We initially hired foresters to roam around New England and kind of preach this new approach to forest management. And soon after that, people started donating their land to us so we could practice what we preach and essentially have those properties as demonstration forests. So we have currently about 35,000 acres around New England in about 150 different parcels, scattered from the Long Island Sound up to down East Maine, almost on the Canadian border, and then over to the Northeast Kingdom kind of area of Vermont. So it's scattered around New England, and it has its benefits and its drawbacks. It's hard to manage 35,000 acres scattered around in a pattern like that, but it gives us a lot of diversity in terms of forest types and markets and things like that, climates, and it gives us an outreach opportunity to a lot of different people in different areas. So we can, landowners typically aren't going to travel too far to educational opportunities to see this kind of stuff. They would want to stay mostly in their local area. So
cool.
So we own and manage these lands to like I said, to demonstrate, the benefits of good forest management to those private landowners who own the vast majority of New England. I forget all the numbers, 80,000 landowners that own, however many millions of acres around New England, pelted by snow out or ice. So we've more recently tried to redefine our management practices in a little more concise manner, which we're calling our exemplary forestry practices, exemplary forestry standards, that lay out, the goals of how we're managing our forests for essentially three co-equal benefits. One is managing to mitigate climate change. Two is to provide a diversity of wildlife habitats. And three is to grow and produce wood products that society, needs. So we manage all of these forests kind of as a unit, but then they're also managed individually. We hire consulting foresters that we give them our overall management philosophy, and they will come out to a property like this, do their timber inventory and assessments of the property, and then write a management plan like I've got here, and that includes prescriptions for treatments on the property, whether it's timber harvesting or anything else we might want to do, some wildlife habitat improvement projects, that kind of stuff. So NEFF acquired the Wharton Plantation here in the late 60s. It was a largely burned over and cut over property when the donor started acquiring land around here, William Wharton, and he undertook a massive tree planting effort. So there were a lot of plantations here. So we've managed it over time, and we've gotten away from plantations more towards natural forests. So we've thinned those plantations along and let them regenerate naturally underneath until we finally took the overstory plantation trees off. So most of what we'll see out here is more natural forest. There are little pockets of plantation left. Right there, you can see some red pine planted that was left in a buffer around a wetland or vernal pool over there. But this harvest, like I said, was done in 2018, about 2 years ago. Shelterwood harvest, essentially preparing this site to regenerate underneath the limited overstory that was retained. It's mostly a pine site, but there's a good portion of mixed oak species in here as well. So conducted this shelterwood harvest to create the proper conditions on the ground to try and regenerate mostly white pine, but also we expect a good mix of other native species. I'm sure we'll get plenty of or I hope we'll get plenty of oak, and I'm sure we'll get plenty of red maple and other associated species that are in the area.
Cool.
So we can. Oh, and I was saying before, you asked about a microburst in the area. So we did this harvest in 08 or 2018. Excuse me. This spring there was a microburst that came through here, and we did have a salvage operation. There was about 30 acres on the other side of the brook that really got flattened. We're probably left with a couple dozen trees per acre left.
Wow.
After all of those blown over and damaged trees got removed. So much more wide open than you'd see out here. But they did salvage in some other places where there was more concentrated damage and volume that made it worth to go in and remove that. There was other places throughout here that the damage was a little more scattered, and those trees that were damaged or broken or blown over were left.
We're just left, yeah.
Just from the economics of it not being worth to go in and get individual
a single tree,
trees.
Right?
So
cool. Fantastic. Thanks for the lead in. That's super useful.
And I didn't know there was going to be so many people on the computer, because I had printed out a little history of Wharton, and
sweet.
and included a map that showed
great.
Some of the, and I can email this around to you later and you can share it with folks.
That would be awesome, actually.
But it shows kind of the more recent history of some of the timber harvests we did on site and how it's fit across the landscape. And that's only over the past 20 years or so. And like I said, we've owned this property since the late 60s. So there's
where are we?
We are right here.
Yep.
So this red area is the harvest from 2018. We'll walk down the road and be able to see some of that. There was a harvest across the road here back in, looks like 2003. So 17 years ago or so. You probably came in along this road, and that was a harvest we did in 2013. Cool. That was again a shelterwood harvest. So, and I don't know if we'll have time to get over there and share the video, but you can see that's essentially what this will look like.
Right.
In a few years. And over there, you can see the understory is filled with a mix of native species, all probably 6 to 10 feet tall. When I was driving in, I definitely noticed more pine in there than I had remembered, so that was good. But I know there's a mix of other native species as well.
Cool.
So that might be, I don't know how to.
Well, we'll see how it goes.
Over there, if we drive over there, but it might be good to show them.
Right, to get a sense of like, this is fresh. This is something that's been a little while.
This is 2 years old, and that's going to be what did I say? 7 years old.
Yeah.
Was it in 2013? Yeah. So
cool.
It might be a good visual.
So I noticed that Rich Birdsley's on the call. So Rich, if you have any questions or thoughts, or you want to just pipe up if you have something you want to say.
Yeah, I will. Can you hear me okay? Just tech.
Yep. Yeah.
Hey, ask
Great.
if they have any trouble with deer browsing on the regeneration.
Yeah.
No, not enough where it's become an issue here. This property is open to the public for hunting, and I think it gets enough pressure to keep that under control. I'm sure there's deer in here. I'm sure there's some browse on the regeneration, but it's not enough that to cause an issue for us. We have other properties where the deer population is much higher, where the property's not open to hunting, and the surrounding property's not open to hunting, and that property in particular, it's in northeastern Connecticut. We have a real problem regenerating the forest there. We're going to have to take some probably pretty drastic issues there, but we don't have that issue here. So
Great.
Cool. Good
Thank
question, Rich.
So just to reiterate, in that case, hunting is a key part of this process then, or if peer pressure is an issue.
I haven't done any studies of the deer population in the area or consulted with Mass Wildlife and surveyed how many people hunt out here. So it's more anecdotal for me, seeing what we've done here over the years versus other places where we don't allow hunting. So.
Yeah.
There's some interesting research that I've seen lately talking about how naturally regenerating trees are healthier and more resilient because they haven't had the tips of their roots trimmed the way nursery stock is.
Oh,
So I don't know if you guys have, you're obviously doing that already, but you may find some research out there that supports that what you're doing is going to be more resilient to climate change and other stressors because the little rootlet tips of the trees are very sensitive and they're involved in communicating with the other trees and setting up their networks. And
Makes all you folks in your nice warm office want to be here.
there's some deer tracks there.
So somebody's around.
Tire bike, maybe?
What's that?
Looks like a fat tire bike.
Yeah, there's a lot of mountain bikers. They use this property as well. So it's open to the public for all sorts of uses. So just quickly, this is the stand right here next to the road that was part of that harvest. Again, like I said, Shelterwood harvest, retaining, the best white pine and some oaks in here as well, that we could for two purposes. One, it's opens up the space so those trees have more room to grow. Their crowns can fill out more. They can grow bigger, faster, but also opens up the sunlight getting down to the forest floor to help create conditions to regenerate those species as well. And hopefully they will drop their seed. And as we get to that other area that was harvested in 2013, you would see, in 5 to 10 years or so, this would be, head tall with thick understory of mixed native tree species.
Yeah.
So we did what's called, well, actually, I don't know if what the harvesting system was here, if they used a cut to length system or not. It was probably a more conventional method, but you can see all the slash that gets left behind. So a lot of branches and tops that weren't usable get left behind on the ground. It is not visually appealing to the general public, and I got lots of emails and phone calls about it. But I think we all know it provides benefits to the site in terms of as that decomposes, returning nutrients to the soil. It helps create kind of micro habitats where it retains more moisture. messy areas like this are good homes for lots of little critters, from, insects and small salamanders and other things like that, and then on up to all the wildlife that eat those. So it provides some other benefits there.
Yeah, this process is from a carbon perspective, the slash is extremely important in stopping this disturbance of the soil through washing away and sort of an exposure to air.
Yep.
And sunlight.
Jim.
Yeah.
Jim, this is Neil. Does the slash, if it's too dense, does it create problems with regenerating vegetation, or?
Perfectly reasonable answer is you have no idea. Richard might have something to say too.
Yeah.
I deal a lot with property owners who are dumping a lot of slash and brush and leaves and debris, and we really try to avoid that because it creates more of a nuisance problem. It actually destabilizes the soils underneath, creates harborage for rodents, pests, things like that. But I would assume if you're not doing heavy slash, like thick slash piles, you're spreading it out, it's a little better, but just wondering about the density of it.
Yeah, I'd imagine it would get to a point where if it was too dense, it would prohibit tree regeneration in there. But again, that will deteriorate. Those materials will decompose, and eventually it would allow for regrowth in there. This is not a condition where I think it would inhibit regeneration. And there, like the question before about deer, there are often times where if you do have too many deer, you might leave slash in a way to try and protect that regeneration.
Make it hard to move through.
Makes it hard for deer to get in and out of a stand, and they will not overbrowse that property.
Think we can get a hole in one of these spots?
I've seen some examples where they pile a slash around the perimeter of a stand specifically to keep the deer out. Is just like making a fence.
I just saw something about that today, about a slash wall, a project down in Rhode Island. And I was going to look at that. I haven't had time to look at it yet, but it heard. I think Cooperative Extension out in Cornell, out in New York, had been doing some work on it. And there was a recent project, like I said, in Rhode Island. So it's definitely something I'm going to look into.
I know in some parts of the country, they're required by regulation to leave a certain percentage of slash in the forest to restore soil carbon and micronutrients and that's mainly in the South, where they have very intensive harvesting on short rotations. And, there's a concern about you keep removing trees, do it over and over again, you eventually degrade the soil. So it does help the soil as the trees decompose or the slash decomposes, and over time becomes incorporated in the litter and then the soil.
And Richard, is it right that most of the nutrients are in the cambium, and therefore if you leave the branches and the slash, you're leaving more of the nutrients in rather than in the trunk of the tree?
I think that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah, in the cambium, or I guess my understanding was most of the nutrients was in the fine branches and the foliage.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my understanding.
Okay. Great. I
Let's try pick a spot and try and dig.
I'm curious about this spot too. This is where you can see the tracks still from 2 years
Right, this is the
ago.
tracks, right?
Yep,
Under
this
the
was
snow
the
where they're pulling the logs out.
Yeah, so this is the skidder trail, so it might be a little different than just off to the side, right? And even
Nice
after
work.
2 growing seasons, you can see, there was stuff growing in here. It comes back with forbs and raspberries and things like that. So it greens up pretty quick, with this flush of growth that provides, a different type of habitat. And but the trees will regenerate here in the next, couple of years. At least that's the plan.
It's gonna work. I thought this might work.
Rocky, Rocky.
All right, what do we get? Okay, now we get to watch. Oh, definitely rocky, yeah. A farm field, this is not. What kind of harvesting rotation do you guys generally hang with? Like how about here? What
Like
would you
on
do
an
here?
individual property or acre.
Mhm.
I would imagine it'd be on the 15 to 20 year range.
That's reasonably often.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on where we are in stand succession and the overall management scheme. So, this site, will regenerate, and once that regeneration gets to, a certain level,
Then you might come back and take these
I
guys.
imagine they would come back in, or we would come back in and do
Much cheaper than that.
another partial overstory.
There's a lot of rock.
So what do we see here?
It's obviously an upland soil. Yeah, I haven't really gotten to the bee horizon yet.
Right, we can't really get down to the bee
Yeah.
horizon just because it's so rocky.
But no, it looks, you've got nice root mat there. Good depth.
And
Some
the roots are
organic.
going pretty far
Yeah, which you'd
down
expect.
in there, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it looks like a typical New England upland
Mhm.
A horizon. And
Cool.
maybe a
And
little
but
bit
it's
of a
also,
grove
it's not
up there.
thrashed. It'll be interesting to try somewhere where it's a little less touched.
Yeah. Or like this is fairly open now. Right?
Now, yeah.
So
Um,
Yeah. But the harvesting here didn't really disturb that upper root mat, so the soil is fairly intact
Uh-huh.
in that particular location.
and I'd imagine where you're standing, again, that
yeah.
was the skidder trail, so that area would be more disturbed.
Yeah, it's going to be compressed. The vegetation will be pulled out more. So where the machine has been, where its tires are, the soil's definitely going to be more disturbed.
And so one of the things that was talked about during the soil action plan was, maps for skid areas in certain places, sensitive areas.
Oh, yep.
And do you ever use anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, generally we try and not, to be operating in less than ideal soil conditions. But as we're also operating in the real world and we can't control the weather, sometimes, and this site was one of them, where the ground conditions were great when they started, and then it changed, and by the time they pulled out, there were some spots that were pretty messy. But we'll definitely do our best to use and follow the BMPs. I don't know that we've used mats for crossing wetlands. I think we'd more avoid those wetlands.
Or do it in the frozen.
We try and do it in more frozen or dry conditions. We've used those mats for skidder bridges on stream crossings. But I'd imagine, one of our foresters around New England has probably used them in places where, for small wetland crossings when they needed to.
Are you finding that there's less fewer days when the ground's frozen enough for harvest?
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, I don't know if it's fewer days, but it's less predictable and less consistent. You know, so probably freezes up later. You know, the data has shown that, right? You know that things have frozen later and thawed sooner, but also I think there's been more inconsistency throughout the winter of cold enough temperatures, but also the precipitation that we're getting there as well.
Yeah, this is the flip side of the conversation we were having on Friday, right?
Friday, it was just so, we were touring on Friday, and it was just so warm and you know,
Yeah.
like beautiful weather. And
And yeah, we were touring farms,
Okay.
and you know, a couple of farmers were talking about, yeah, it's so unpredictable. It's like we could have been harvesting, you know, into November this year if we had planted
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
But who knew? You
Yeah,
know.
yeah. Very true.
And that the unpredictability was really quite a problem for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
yeah, I have one more question. So you talk about regeneration of these species that are existing around here.
Yep.
Are you doing any consideration of you know, presuming climate shifting up,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Of introducing seeds or anything from more southern areas.
We're definitely in those conversations with the larger groups that are talking about that. We're not at a point yet where we're actively doing that, or you know, planning to do it in the next year or two. But we're, you know, talking with all sorts of groups around New England and the country that are working on that stuff, climate mitigation. There's the Adaptive Silviculture for Climate Change group. Maria Janowiak out of NIAX in Minnesota, or Michigan, that we work with a lot.
Michigan, yeah.
On her adaptive forestry stuff. So there's a lot of talk about it, and we're in those conversations. Not there yet. So we're mainly focused on regenerating native species that are well adapted to the site, and keeping the site fully stocked. So we're not actively.
You're not actively transitioning.
No, we're more in the I think resilience camp, or resilience course,
right?
Making the forest resilient to climate change, be able to you know, adapt to it, and you know, I think resistance is there are places where we might be trying to resist some of that change, maintain current conditions, and other places where we're just letting the forest naturally transition to its new state, but not actively helping
pushing
that
it.
transition by planting. You know, there's talk of planting, you know, whole new species that are native to more southern ranges, or planting genetic stock of
By the way,
native species from
the
farthest south
started
of the
a
range.
Facebook
You know,
live stream.
getting white pine or red oak,
Figured out how to do
you
that.
know, white oak from farther south in its range, bringing that genetic stock up here and planting it to that might be better adapted. So
Cool.
right in that buffer area around that wetland, in that stand of red pine, might be, you know, that hasn't been cut. Well, probably since this was farmland.
Should I leave this hole like that?
That's fine.
We care.
I was just asking if they allow mountain biking on the property.
They seem to.
We do. We've worked with some locals who have installed some new mountain bike trails on this property. So there are a couple trails that are specifically designed for mountain bikes. You know, the rest of the trails on the property are more like this, the old woods roads, old skid roads, things like that. But there are a couple of specific mountain bike trails.
Get out your bike, Neil.
Great, thanks.
I have a general question. I'm wondering what sort of monitoring you do on your tracks. Do you have permanent inventory plots, or do you use remote sensing? How do you keep track of where things are, how they're changing?
Yeah. So I don't know if we want to stop and talk.
Yeah.
It's
Sure,
probably
that's a good question from Richard. So,
too noisy with this crunching snow. So we have essentially two different inventory systems that we use. We have a whole lands inventory that we've been doing for about 15 years now, where we have a series of 250 every year. We'll run a series of 250 random plots. We measure 50 new plots a year, and then we'll drop the oldest 50 in that group. So this year we'll have 50 plots from 2020, 50 from 2019, 50 from 2018, and so forth. So it's kind of a rolling whole lands inventory that we use to track our volumes across our whole 35,000 acres that we own. So that's used more from like I said, 30,000 foot level, and tracks, we use that to help guide our annual harvest volumes. But then each individual forest like this has a management plan with its own individual inventory that the forester does on that property to help get a better, more detailed sense of what's actually on this parcel and how to manage it. But each of those foresters, does inventorying a little different. We have 70-year-old foresters who are still doing, 10th acre plots or whatever. And, the younger guys have transitioned to, prism points and stuff like that. So there's a lot of variability in those individual management plan inventories because of the different methods, but also the different local markets. And what the forester here might be able to sell is going to be different versus what a forester in Eastern Maine could sell. So those inventories will be more detailed to that individual parcel. And because they're all different like that, we can't necessarily just add them all up to a whole lands inventory and it be really statistically defensible. So that's why we started that other whole lands inventory method.
Right.
Great.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm nodding my head, but of course you can't see me.
You just have to tell us. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
But
So we don't.
maybe
So we
one.
don't have any permanent inventory plots on any of our properties.
If we were to request a little data for this particular track, could we take a look at it sometime?
Definitely, yeah.
Sweet.
Well, I mean, the handout has some data, but I can give you more as well.
Yeah, and also physical things are tricky because we don't get together physically anymore.
Yeah.
This is as close as we've been for yeah. So yeah, and Richard is like in Pennsylvania at this point. So
This worksheet that I had worked up a few years ago for a tour out here, shows the inventory starting in the mid 50s and how that's increased periodically over the time, as well as a list of all the harvests we've had over that same period of time. And then the map shows where those were the last 20 years or so.
It'd be very interesting to see. Thanks.
yeah, cool. Okay. Let's go to the next thing, and then Richard, I might set you up to ask when we stop walking if there are specific things that you're interested in. So just hold that thought for a minute. All right.
So this was one of the skid roads, and you can see, I hope you can see a lot more slash laid across this skid road. So the logger put that there to try and help protect the soils as he was going up and down this stretch, and also to help stabilize them afterwards to prevent erosion.
So the slash went on before they were really driving it.
Yeah, I mean, they opened up the skid road, and then,
Right.
you know, as they were using it, I'm sure they added more
And
slash
just
to it
added
along the
slash
way
as they were going.
as they were going.
Uh-huh.
But again, you know, not very attractive. You know, that's going to be hard to walk on or recreate on.
Hard on the mountain bike.
Hard on the mountain bikers.
Neil, there's your challenge.
Challenging. Yeah.
You know, but you know, that's one of the trade-offs for you know, protecting the soils from compaction during the operation, as well as erosion.
I'm just gonna wander up and take a little closer look. Yeah, that's super interesting. So you can see the road just layered up with slash as they're working. Obviously, somebody was driving on it because it's got track divots.
Yep. And then there's this little stand across the road, this old red pine stand that we were going to thin. But there are some endangered species on this property. So in Massachusetts, when you're doing a timber harvest, you file a cutting plan that goes into the DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation. It also gets passed along to Mass Wildlife and their Natural Heritage Department.
Yep.
They sent us back a letter and said, all right, on this property, there are, you know, X, you know, rare, threatened, or endangered species. And please take these precautions to protect those.
You get to follow me into the forest. You're gonna be able to get through this? Oh yeah.
This one easy. We're not comparing apples to apples. Probably different soil types.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely a different soil type.
They're definitely able to. Okay, so we have the pine litter, right? Would that be the O horizon?
So we're just commenting that obviously in this location it's a completely different soil type, and
But we can see the composition here, right? So,
Yeah, you got,
Julian, you can speak much better to this than me, but this is a litter, right?
yep, yep.
And then we have
There's probably, so you have the fresh stuff on top from this year's leaf fall that has not started decomposing yet. That's not considered part of the soil. And then you have some recent leaf litter that has started to decompose, and that is considered part of the soil. And so typically you kind of rub it around in your hand a bit, and then you can determine what percent is fibrous. And this would typically be an OI layer. There's several. There's OI, which is there's OI, OE, and OA, and it's a gradation of less decomposed to the most decomposed, OA being the most decomposed. You won't necessarily have all three in every profile, but I think you have the OI here. And then this darker area has a lot of decomposed organics in it relative to mineral soil, but it's going to be mostly mineral soil. So that kind of mix of the organics and the minerals called an A horizon. So you have a little bit of the A, and then this color, we can get out the Munsell Soil Color Book.
I love that it's color. That's the thing.
Yeah, and we can find out what color this is. My glasses are a little, probably not the best for today, But
Mhm.
is that looking like
Yeah,
10 wire
that's about right.
3/4?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a 3/4, which is a classic uh, Massachusetts bee horizon color. And it's feeling texture-wise, it feels like fine sandy loam.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, much different from what we were looking at earlier, right? This
Yeah.
is much more sandy.
There's a little bit of a gravel fraction in here, sharp edges. So this is kind of a classic New England till soil, a glacial till as the parent material.
Mhm.
Upland, obviously.
And from a carbon perspective,
Uh-huh.
right? From what we're looking at from a carbon perspective, this is I'm going to say some things that I have no idea whether they make any sense, but we'll get you guys talking. That they the transport of carbon into this soil is really dependent on the trees as opposed to the undergrowth or some of the things that we see that mineral soil is. There's not a lot of direct transport of carbon down into that as opposed to a much deeper A horizon.
Yeah, and so if we compare it to what we just saw over there, right, which was a root mat. So there's grasses and a root mat, compared to this, which is a litter with a high carbon, really high carbon soil.
Right at the root, at
Right
the bottom
mat.
of the root.
And then
The-
a lot more, you'll end up with a lot more deeper carbon too.
Deeper carbon from the larger tree roots.
Tree roots
In there?
break down.
Okay. I mean, that other site would have that as well.
Yeah.
You know, they'll start decomposing
Yeah. And
sooner than these will because they're still alive. But
Cool. All right.
I guess compared to an agricultural or
oh yeah, yep.
I have one question
Yeah.
while we're talking about the
Sorry.
soil here.
Okay.
Just we're hitting 3 different spots.
Yeah.
So what I'm interested in is if we were to go through and cut this, right?
Yep.
And I'm interested in what happens during the transition from this, like a litter and duff system, to a grass and root system like we saw over there. What happens to that soil and the carbon in that transition period? There's not a question we have to answer. It's just I'm just curious about that because that's the interplay we're talking about.
That's really interesting.
Um,
So this hilltop to the right here across the field was harvested as well, and there was some storm damage in that stand that we salvaged as well. It's probably hard to tell from here, but stand conditions were similar to what we looked at that first site on this side of the road.
what's the harvest from this forest particularly, but generally used for?
Well, typical, our harvests are going to produce a wide range of products. Obviously saw logs are going to be the highest value product that we get, but we try and utilize as much of the tree as we can. So there will be, saw logs or higher quality veneer logs coming off, as well as pulpwood, firewood if there's a local firewood market, chips if there's a chip market as well, and if we're doing a whole tree harvest where you're dragging more of the tree down to the landing and then chipping. So this is the landing from 2013. You can see that's even regenerating. We've got some pines and other hardwoods coming in here, but we can go just up over the hill into that harvest that was essentially the same as what we just looked at, but we'll see what regeneration is coming in up there.
Cool.
So at the landing, the landing soils would be much more impacted than the most impacted of the soils from the harvest. We have a wildlife site. There's a porcupine up on the top of this pine tree. Can they see that?
I don't know. Can you guys see the porcupine?
Totally. That's amazing.
Oh, he's even moving for us.
Oh, that's mine.
But I thought I didn't plan the porcupine, but that's great.
A little illustration of
Yeah.
habitat.
So yeah, wildlife are still using these sites after we've harvested them, but just wanted to kind of show how much this is regenerated. You know, we have some red maple sprouts here, so those are stump sprouts. But we also have some, you know, pine that is seeded in, some white pine that is seeded in, as well as some oaks that have seeded in as well. So you can see this is, you know, unfortunately the top of this one died. I don't know if it was a white pine weevil or what, but
That one too.
yeah. But this is the regeneration that we're looking for, this mixture of native species. You know, red maple isn't ideal, but it's native, but more we're looking at regenerating oak and pine, like you can see that we have coming up here in pretty good numbers, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I got to get a picture of the porcupine as well.
Do you do thinning too at some point, or?
Yeah, I'm sure this site had been thinned over the years. You know, those intermediate treatments, thinnings, would have improved the spacing, improved the growing capacity of the trees that were left. Trying to think if there's a stand, probably a stand on this road on the way out that would be kind of more indicative of what this looked like before we harvested it. But it, you know, I didn't go back in our records. We've had a number of harvests on the site. I'm sure the stand had been thinned probably a couple of times over that 60 or 80 years here. But this was essentially the first step in regenerating the stand. So along the way, we've just been conducting those intermediate treatments, tending the trees that were on site. This was the first step in trying to regenerate a new stand of trees. That's worked pretty well, I think. The next step in that treatment would be, you know, some sort of overstory removal. We'd come back in, excuse me, and you know, remove a certain percentage of this overstory to release that regeneration that we've gotten started. And then over the years, all this regeneration, we'd come in and thin it. So it's essentially an even age management technique. You know, it's just instead of a one-time regeneration cut of a clear cut, you know, removing everything, it's this multi-stage. You know, so this prep cut to get the regeneration, and then probably one or two stages of removing the overstory. I think we'll probably leave a certain percentage of these overstory trees. I don't know exactly how much right now, but we'd want to retain some of those just for legacy's sake, you know, of whether they're wildlife trees, you know, some big old ugly wolf pine tree that really has no market value, but is, you know, just storing a lot of carbon and it's huge. And so those kinds of things we might leave.
Producing seed.
Yep. Exactly.
Cool. Yeah, this is it's great to see it at this stage. It's like
Yeah.
a whole different affair.
Yeah. And like I said, the regeneration comes from seed, but also sprouts. There's some oak stump sprouts right behind you here. You know, so I'm sure people know stump sprouts. You know, most hardwood trees, when you cut them, they
Yeah,
will
they
sprout from that
sprout
stump
up.
or from the root system, depending on the species.
Because hey, there's all that root there.
So, when I visited Germany, it seemed like most of the forests around there were heavily managed and planted in plantations.
Yep.
More.
Yeah.
And so you're saying that was a technique that was applied in this area, probably after the sheep.
After the sheep, you know, things mostly regenerated naturally.
Okay.
You know, in this area, a lot of it came back into white pine, and like I said, you'd get those big wolf pines where, you know, the tops were killed by the weevil, and then they created these multi-stemmed pine trees. And then, you know, periods of harvesting, you know, in between that natural reforestation. Here, William Wharton was a little more proactive and you know, did some planting, but that's, you know, I don't know the statistics of how widespread that planting was. I know, you know, Civilian Conservation Corps did a lot of planting, and there was a lot of cost share assistance to do planting in the past. You know, I don't know how many acres around New England, but I'd say the vast majority of, you know, abandoned farmland just regenerated naturally, reforested naturally.
All right. I'm curious to just dig a hole here.
Oh, yeah.
You want to do it here on the track, or you want to do it?
I'm thinking of doing it more in there.
Yeah.
Just so
Yeah.
This is definitely.
This is the skid trail here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you can get a little help from the porcupine. I'm getting there.
So yeah, there's a lot of brush, huh?
Yeah,
It's different than the grass.
yeah. So we got one grass, one scrub, and one forest. Is pretty cool.
Whirl of branches, you've got a perfect little spot. Like a porcupine lounge chair.
Exactly. I'm going to get you to hold this for a sec.
Okay.
If you don't mind.
I do not mind.
Wherever you want. I just have to get a battery set up.
Oh, okay.
We need the oracle.
Jillian.
The
The
expert.
oracle to come over and.
She's working on becoming a porcupine expert over there.
Will you read our soils
Yeah.
for us?
Okay.
Yeah.
So similar to what we had at the other site, we have this year's stuff right there, and then we have some partially decomposed litter from prior years, and we do the same thing where we kind of rub it around a bit, and that helps you see that it's really different from this year's stuff. But you can still see a lot of the structure. So that's why we designated it OI. And then underneath that we have this A horizon here. There's a lot of fine roots in here, and below the A horizon is a B horizon, and we can color that.
I love how dirty the book is.
This is actually clean compared to some people's. This is, no, I actually, I'm gonna change the page. That's a little better. What do you think
Yeah,
about that?
that's a little closer.
Yeah, 7.5 YR34. So this is very similar to the B horizon that we saw in the forested area. It's the 4 is that 4 number is the chroma, and that's fairly high chroma number, meaning it's fairly oxygenated
Right.
soil. So the iron in the soil it's an upland condition where there's plenty of oxygen in the soil. If it were a wetland profile, that 4 number would be down in a 2 or a 1 typically, and that it would be much darker. So yeah, and then fine sandy loam again for texture. So it's fairly similar. The 7.5 YR versus 10 YR, those are just slight differences in the color. The hue, not the lightness or the darkness, but the hue of the soil.
So I think like one of the things it seems we're seeing here is that the AI and the OI and the A horizons are a little thicker. There's a little more to them.
I don't know. We didn't do a tape measure. I don't.
No, there's
I
more
don't think
roots
so.
in them than the pine.
Yeah, I think there's more roots here. We're in
Just
a
'cause of the
shrubby environment,
Stuff, right?
but I don't really think there's a significant difference in the thickness of the O and the A, to be
Cool.
honest.
Okay,
It's
no, that's
fairly
good.
Similar.
That
Yeah, just more.
my observations are not meant to be correct. They're meant to promote
Questioning,
conversation.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's great. No, yeah.
Cool.
Oh, okay. Let me take a picture of this one too.
Yeah, see, some of them have the red pine side,
Don't worry about it. Yeah.
right? They're standing.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Some of the red pines are snagged.
Have died. Yeah. That is true. I'm not exactly sure the reason or when, but snags are another important part of the forest that we would retain if at all possible when we're doing a harvest. To keep snags for wildlife purposes. As well as future contributions to downwoody debris and the value that provides.
So, are the red pines propagating as well, or not?
I don't see any red pine seedlings right here.
Those are planted as part of the plantation.
Those were planted. Yes. I haven't looked back at the records in terms of the plantings that were done. I'm assuming that it was a mix of red and white pine. There's probably some maybe Norway spruce in places as well. But I'd imagine some of this white pine was that's in the overstory had naturally regenerated along the way as well. But I don't think any of this red pine was natural here before. I'd say that was all planted. I'd imagine there's probably some red pine that's regenerating, but not a whole lot.
All right. Well, it's probably time for us to make our way back.
Yeah, I think it's probably 11,
As camp counselor, that's my
11:03. So we'll leave the porcupine in peace.
yeah. Nice.
It's really beautiful in here.
It is. It's really quite lovely, which is kind of amazing, considering that this was harvested what 7-8 years ago.
So, yeah,
Um,
exactly.
there's quite a lot of activity here.